Fame can shine brighter than the sun, but when it fades, it leaves shadows no one sees. Cliff Richard, once the man who gave Britain its first true rock and roll star, carried a smile that seemed unbreakable. Yet behind decades of chart-topping songs and sold-out tours, his life became a story of heartbreak, loneliness, and betrayal. At 84, he has spoken with a brutal honesty that shocked even his most loyal fans, revealing the hidden cost of living a life under the spotlight. The boy who became Britain's first rock star. Harry Roger Webb was born on October 14, 1940 in Lucknow, India, during the chaos of war and revolution. His family fled in 1948 as the British Empire collapsed, traveling for 3 long weeks across the ocean before settling in a modest home in Surrey. The boy who once knew comfort now lived in rationing and gray skies. But that hardship gave him drive. In the late 1950s, a manager told him he needed a stronger name, something that sounded like rock. Harry became Cliff Richard, Cliff for strength, Richard for Little Richard. In August 1958, he released Move It. He was only 18, but the single hit #2 on the UK charts and set off a cultural earthquake. For the first time, British teenagers had their own rock star, not an American copy. The hysteria was immediate. Newspapers called it Cliff Hysteria. In 1959, Living Doll went to #1 for 6 weeks, selling more than 770,000 copies. A year later, Travelin' Light repeated the feat. By the early 1960s, Cliff and his band, The Shadows, were unstoppable. He wasn't just a singer. He starred in Serious Charge, a dark film dealing with heavy moral issues, and Espresso Bongo, which satirized the music industry. In 1963, Summer Holiday became a box office smash, its soundtrack sitting at #1 for 14 straight weeks. British cinema and music were his domain. Even when the Beatles stormed onto the scene, Cliff held his ground, scoring 6 top 10 hits in 1964 while the Beatles managed 5. John Lennon once admitted that before Cliff Richard, there was nothing worth listening to in England. By 1965, Cliff was voted the world's top male singer by New Musical Express, beating Elvis Presley, John Lennon, and Paul McCartney. He seemed untouchable, but beneath the screaming fans and record-breaking sales, Cliff was already carrying grief that never left him. Personal losses and the lonely path. Behind the curtain of fame, Cliff Richard faced heartbreak that fame could never protect him from. In 1961, just as his career was gaining momentum, his father, Roger Webb, died of complications from thrombosis. Cliff was only 21. It was his father who had noticed his love for music, bought him his first guitar, and encouraged him when no one else did. The loss struck like a hammer blow. He later admitted that the void never healed, that the man who had given him his start never lived to see what his son would become. With Roger gone, Cliff took on the responsibility of supporting his mother, Dorothy, and his 3 younger sisters. The pressure of fame alone was enormous, but now he carried the financial and emotional burden of an entire family. His clean-cut, disciplined image was not just a stage persona, it was forged from necessity. He could not afford to fall apart, not when so many depended on him. As the years passed, another devastating farewell awaited. His mother, Dorothy, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. For more than a decade, Cliff watched the slow decline of the woman who had raised him. He described the helplessness of visiting her and realizing she no longer recognized him. When she died in 2007, the grief was compounded by years of sorrow that had already drained him. The cycle of loss did not end there. In 2016, his sister Donna died suddenly, only weeks after he had been cleared of false allegations that nearly destroyed his career. During those difficult years, Donna had been his anchor, calling him daily, giving him strength when he was at his lowest. Her death left him broken once again, a reminder that just as he regained his footing, life would take something away. Loneliness became the undercurrent of his story. Cliff never married, never had children, and often admitted he wondered what life might have been like had he chosen a different path. To the world, he was the eternal bachelor boy. To himself, he was a man carrying losses that piled one on top of another. Fame filled arenas, but it could not fill the silence at home. Faith, fame, and the cost of sacrifice. At the height of his fame in the early 1960s, Cliff Richard made a decision that shocked his fans and the music industry. In 1964, at just 24, he became a born-again Christian. By 1966, he stood beside American evangelist Billy Graham at Earl's Court and publicly declared his faith before thousands. In the middle of the swinging 60s, when rock stars were expected to rebel, Cliff took a path no one imagined. Some fans cried, others stood in silence, unable to reconcile the pop idol with the man on stage speaking of God. Industry insiders whispered that his career was finished. Rock stars weren't supposed to talk about faith. Cliff himself even considered leaving music altogether to become a teacher or missionary. For a time, the pressure nearly drove him off the stage, but instead of vanishing, he adapted. He refused to perform certain songs that no longer fit his beliefs, softened his image, and matured his music. He became the first major British pop star to openly merge faith with fame, a balancing act that no one before him had attempted. This choice gave him inner peace, but came with a cost. While his peers were partying, Cliff was living in isolation. Touring schedules, constant scrutiny, and his refusal to live the stereotypical rock and roll lifestyle created a wall between him and a normal private life. He later admitted that his public image of confidence was mostly an act, and that only after embracing his faith did he truly feel free. The hits kept coming, proof that he could endure. In 1976, Devil Woman revived his career, selling over 2 million copies worldwide and giving him his first American top 10. In 1988, Mistletoe and Wine became the biggest-selling UK single of the year, while Savior's Day reached #1 in 1990. Over the decades, he reinvented himself again and again, selling more than 250 million records and achieving the rare feat of scoring top 5 albums in 8 different decades. Yet behind the awards and chart records, there was sacrifice. Cliff gave up the possibility of a family life, sacrificed privacy, and carried the weight of living as both an icon and an outlier. His faith gave him strength, but it also marked him as different, forever set apart from the world around him. Scandal, betrayal, and exile. For decades, Cliff Richard seemed untouchable. Knighted in 1995, celebrated as the Peter Pan of pop, he had survived changing trends and personal losses with dignity intact. But in August 2014, everything collapsed in a way he could never have imagined. While Cliff was on holiday in Portugal, helicopters circled above his Berkshire home. Police raided the property, and cameras broadcast it live across the world. The BBC had been tipped off, even calling the raid internally the money shot. Cliff, who had never been arrested or charged, was humiliated in front of millions. The raid was triggered by an anonymous accusation of historic sexual abuse, allegedly dating back to 1985 during a Billy Graham rally. The claim unraveled quickly. The supposed location of the alleged assault didn't even exist at the time. Officers assigned to guard Cliff that night weren't interviewed, despite being with him the entire time. Yet the investigation dragged on for 22 months. No charges were filed. No evidence was ever found. But the damage was done. Cliff later described feeling contaminated, as if his very home had been poisoned. He lost weight, developed shingles, and lay awake at night fearing his heart would give out from the stress. He stopped feeling safe leaving the house, haunted by the thought that people were silently asking, was it true? Even after he was cleared, the suspicion lingered in whispers and headlines. In 2018, Cliff finally won his case against the BBC. A judge ruled that the broadcast had been a serious violation of his privacy, and he was awarded damages. Yet even in victory, he admitted that once an accusation is made, it can never truly be erased. Will I ever get over it? No, he told members of the House of Lords. The ordeal left scars that no apology or payout could heal. Disillusioned, Cliff began spending more time at his home in Barbados. To outsiders, it looked like paradise, but to him it felt like exile, an escape from the country he had once proudly called home. For a man who had given Britain its first rock and roll star, the betrayal cut deeper than any headline. Love, loneliness, and the cost of never marrying. Throughout his career, Cliff Richard carried a label that began as a song but turned into a lifelong reality: The Bachelor Boy. In 1963, when he recorded the light-hearted track of that name, fans laughed at the idea of their teenage idols staying single. But as the years passed and Cliff remained unmarried, the label became a question that followed him everywhere. Why had one of the world's most eligible men never walked down the aisle? Cliff was not without romance. In the 1980s, he dated former tennis star Sue Barker, a relationship the press followed closely. He admitted he had considered marriage, but ultimately confessed his feelings were not strong enough to make such a commitment. It would not have been fair to either of them, he explained. In his autobiography, My Life, My Way, he wrote that while he had known deep love, marriage simply never felt like the right path. His career, with its constant demands and public scrutiny, left little space for the kind of trust and privacy a lasting relationship would require. His bond with Olivia Newton-John revealed another side of his heart. Cliff admitted he had fallen in love with her when they first worked together in the early 1970s, yet she was engaged to Bruce Welch, his own bandmate from The Shadows. The timing was impossible. Still, Cliff and Olivia remained close friends for 5 decades, singing together countless times. Their final duet in 2015, during Cliff's 75th birthday concert at the Royal Albert Hall, became an unspoken farewell. When Olivia died in 2022 after a long battle with cancer, Cliff described the moment as devastating. He said she had simply stopped living, a phrase that revealed how difficult it was for him to use the word death. For more than 30 years, one of the few steady presences in his private life was Bill Latham, his close friend and former manager. They lived together in his Sunningdale mansion, along with Bill's mother and later Cliff's own mother. Gossip surrounded the arrangement, but Cliff always said Bill was like family, the one who saw him beyond the stage lights. When Bill died in 2022, Cliff admitted he felt a void that could never be filled. Now, without a wife, children, or Bill, Cliff's inner circle has become painfully small. Success gave him a place in history, but it also left him alone in ways that even millions of fans could never mend. The final curtain, and the fear of time. In recent years, Cliff Richard has spoken with a blunt honesty that has startled his fans. After nearly 7 decades on stage, the man once hailed as the eternal Peter Pan of pop is facing the one truth even he cannot escape: time. In 2025, at the age of 84, while touring Australia and New Zealand, he admitted that he may not be able to keep performing much longer. "I don't want to be an 85-year-old guy trying to be 18, he said candidly. The words were not bitter, but weary. The voice of someone who has given everything to music and knows his body can no longer keep pace with his ambition. When asked if his Can't Stop Me Now tour might be his last, Cliff did not sugarcoat it. "I don't know. I might be dead the next year." For millions of fans who grew up with him, those words cut deep. Cliff, who had always seemed unshakable, was openly acknowledging mortality. The man who once filled Wembley Stadium and outsold the Beatles was suddenly admitting that the applause would one day fade, and sooner than anyone wanted to believe. It is not just the physical toll of age. Cliff has spoken about the loneliness that now shadows his days. Without parents, siblings, or the close friends who once steadied him, his world has grown quieter. Fame still surrounds him, but in private, the silence is heavy. Even as he continues to record and release new music, he has acknowledged that radio stations rarely play his songs anymore, dismissing him simply because he is old. "They don't play me because I'm old," he said in 2025, summing up a truth that stings more than critics ever could. From the boy who boarded a ship out of India in 1948 to the man who sold more than 250 million records, Cliff Richard's life has been a story of triumph and tragedy intertwined. He remains the only artist in UK history to score top 5 albums across 8 decades, a record that will likely never be matched. But behind the statistics and the honors is an aging man reflecting on sacrifice, love lost, and the cost of survival in an industry that rarely forgives. Cliff Richard's story is one of brilliance and heartbreak, of victories that shaped music history and wounds that never truly healed. After all the applause, the number ones, and the decades of devotion, he now faces the hardest chapter, time itself. Do you think his sacrifices were worth the price he paid? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories of music legends.